Thank you.
Okay, seeing no more comment here, we'll proceed to issue number 2 and bring up First 5 California, Parent Voices, the R&R Network, and continue with the Department of Education. And do we have a representative from Parent Voices?
Yeah, she may be outside.
Are there enough seats for everyone?
Okay. Well, they're further down, so we'll start with Erin Gable with First 5 California.
Good morning. Thank you, Chairman. Erin Gable. And on behalf of First 5 California, I just want to thank the Assembly for your continued year-over-year leadership on the importance of early learning, on the system of early learning, and its twin goals of making sure that parents can work and that children are in an environment that helps their brains and their lives to thrive. We urge the legislature to be thoughtful in rebuilding with urgency access to high-quality early learning and care systems in California. As you had heard in the previous panel, we lost over $1 billion and 100,000 slots to the system. And it's important to realize the system will not and should not be restored, but instead it needs to be rebuilt. First, no one would argue that our early learning system was adequate prior to 2008. Prior to the estimated loss of over 100,000 slots and $1 billion, there were hundreds of thousands of already eligible children and families on our state waiting lists. As you heard in the previous panel, a waiting list we no longer even have to keep track of the demand for current eligible families. And then in addition to that, two significant changes have happened in the last years that have to be considered. These are two significant policy changes in addition to the loss of the slots, the loss of significant infrastructure because of these cuts, and 19% estimated in lost COLA that we were unable to afford during those hard years. First, as you heard earlier, the CalWORKs overhaul means that fewer children will be served by the stages. Not because fewer low-income children need access to high-quality child care, but because fewer children's families qualify for this particular child care access window. This is significant. This change forces us to think about our other early learning and care options and to think about the families who still need access as we rebuild our system. We should not think about the stage's caseload decreases as cost savings, as we unfortunately have in previous years, but rather to think about it as a catalyst to build slots in our alternative payment, general child care, and preschool programs to accommodate these children who need high-quality services. Second, the promise that was contained in last year's budget for full-day, full-year preschool for all eligible 4-year-olds was both a significant commitment and a challenge for our state. Partly because we need to be thoughtful not just about how these new preschool slots could be accommodated in any particular budget year, but also because these slots have necessary investments required in order to provide universal access for all low-income 4-year-olds from working families. Access is not just a matter of slots, but capacity at the local level to open classrooms, to staff classrooms, and to provide high-quality environments for learning. This capacity is about slots, rates, professional development, and infrastructure in order to achieve the preschool promise. Our early learning and child care system is complex because of the diversity of needs, goals, and funding streams behind the system. However, this diversity is not a dysfunction because of its complexity. The fact is that parents have multiple windows in California by which they enter our subsidized early learning system, and they have very complex personal reasons for selecting the care that they do. Our mission here in California needs to be to strive to provide the highest quality early learning environment for every child, because that is the best way that we are going to influence these life outcomes for each child. The research is clear. High-quality learning environments for babies and for young children are the most impactful investment that our state can make in the future success of each child and our society. Each slot that we provide and the capacity to make that an impactful slot and opportunity for the child has the potential to be the game changer for each life. Access issue is complex. Yes, it's slots, but as you'll hear over and over again today from all of my colleagues, it's also fundamentally linked to rates, infrastructure, and quality. At First Five California, we absolutely appreciate the complex dynamics as you are rebuilding for the Great Recession in this budget year. But we urge the legislature to remember that there was a disproportionate and an enormous amount of cuts that were made during the hard years to this infrastructure for young children, and therefore it will take significant, hard, multiple-year investments during what unfortunately are some of the best budget years we've had in a very long time in order to even start to rebuild what little we had when we started. We would urge you to rebuild access in our early learning and care system that addresses access through slots, through priority for high-quality infant and toddler care for working families, rate increases to ensure that providers can afford to use the slots that you provide, and then to address in the short and long term the infrastructure, data, and capacity issues that we face as we try to rebuild, even if it is incrementally. So specifically and in conclusion on the access question, we would recommend that first you re-envision your data systems and eligibility systems so that we have a better handle on the demand issues across our state and each of our local communities. Number two, that we look at significant rate increases and adjustment factor changes so that providers can utilize in a high quality way the infant and toddler slots that we are and will continue to increase in providing. And finally, that we look at significant and equal slot increases for our babies and for our preschoolers. We would urge the most significant possible investments in that slot and opportunity area for both babies and preschoolers. And we're hoping it can be to the tune of what the Women's Caucus is urging, looking at least $600,000 in investments over this budget year. Thank you. 600 million. Thank you. That's a big difference. I know. Thank you for the correction.
Okay. And next, June Lynn Hall from Parent Voices.
Good morning. I guess I don't have to say my name. No. I'm a mother of 2 children, and I'm a parent leader with Parent Voices San Francisco chapter. And I thank you for this opportunity to be on this panel. This opportunity is a demonstration that honors and values my expertise as a parent, and that I am part of a team, and we are working together on behalf of the child's well-being. Parent choice is one of the better policies in the child care system because parents are the experts in knowing their child. As a parent, I have used different types of child care settings where my children receive quality care. As a parent, I know the struggle in making ends meet and what it takes to care for children. As a parent, I am dealing with unrealistic expectations and circumstances of economic instability. As a parent, I have dealt with children going without child care. I have worked and attended school non-traditional hours and needed flexibility and childcare availability. I remember when I attended evening classes and weekend classes at City College, and I needed evening and weekend childcare and could only get 2 days a week of daytime care for my son at a licensed childcare center. I had to rely on exempt care. I needed options that matched my variable schedules, and my son needed options to quality childcare settings. My experiences as a parent hold a great insight and doesn't have an expiration date to creating the solutions our children need to improve California childcare system. In addition, I can remember when my daughter needed childcare that was developmentally appropriate for her special needs. My daughter is diagnosed with cerebral palsy. I applied to the centralized eligibility list, and she was assigned to a licensed child care center. The center did not offer her the quality care she needed. The environment posed a danger, and the provider ratio was not able to offer the one-on-one attentive care she needed, in which resulted in my daughter experiencing a severe head injury. I know that accidents happen, but I felt that this was not the right placement for her. Thus, I had to rely on respite care and family child care home. I need a child care system to be supportive to my right as a parent, choosing by demonstrating equity so the needs of my children are getting met. In addition, I need a child care system that practices inclusion. Inclusion is an attitude and an approach to ensuring that every person, regardless of ability or background, meaningfully participates in all aspects of life. Parents don't choose child care carelessly. We know what quality is. We need our child care system to support our choice in order to support the diverse needs of our children.
Thank you. Next, Rowena Quinto, California Resources and Referral Network.
Good morning, chairs, members. Rowena Quinto with the California Child Care Resource and Referral Network, and I want to thank you for having me here today to speak on the important issue of child care. My focus today will be on the overall licensed child care supply in California. Child care serves the dual purpose of allowing parents to work, as well as giving children a safe place to learn, develop, and be cared for. The availability of and access to quality, affordable, reliable child care has been identified in a number of strategies as a means to family economic security. In recent years, we've seen California's unemployment rate declining with a rate of about 7% at the end of 2014. And as parents enter the workforce, the need for child care becomes more urgent. So as parents are taking up jobs, whether full-time or part-time, during the traditional 9 to 5 or the non-traditional hours, we need to look at how the child care infrastructure has kept up with those changes. The California Child Care Resource and Referral Network has been documenting the licensed child care supply since 1996. And we do that through the California Child Care Portfolio, which we produce every 2 years. The 2015 portfolio will be coming out later this fall. And we're able to do this through close partnerships with local resource and referral programs in each county. So the data I'm going to talk about is the licensed capacity that a provider is able to provide at any given time, so the number of children they're able to serve at any given time. And there are 3 main points that I'd like to highlight from our data. First, the total licensed child care supply has increased since 1996, reaching its peak in 2008. After the Great Recession, we saw a decline in the total licensed child care supply. Center-based capacity for infants and preschoolers stayed fairly stable. This was not the case for family child care homes or centers serving school-age children. The capacity to serve children in family child care homes and centers serving school-age children shrank pretty dramatically during the Great Recession. The capacity had decreased for both by about 20%. Since 2008, we found that 46 counties showed a decline in family child care home providers, and 32 counties showed a decline in center-based care. The shrinking supply of family child care home providers is of great concern, as this type of care is much more affordable for families and provides care during non-traditional hours. In our last portfolio, we found about 40% of family child care home providers offered evening, weekend, and overnight care. And we also found that families participating in the CalWORKS and AP program have consistently utilized family child care providers more than any other type of setting. The last point I'd like to make is that state investment in child care has an important role in maintaining a healthy child care supply and stabilizing child care, especially in low-income communities. State-subsidized care, both voucher-based and direct contracts, maintain a significant presence in the licensed child care market. Of the 294,000 children served through state-funded child care programs, over 80%, or 245,000, are in a licensed child care setting. This represents about 23% of the licensed child care capacity. Almost 30% of licensed centers have at least one direct public contract from the state to serve children, and the capacity at these centers represent about 15% of the total licensed center-based capacity. Center-based supply. A survey that we conducted of family child care home providers in 5 counties in California showed that over 60% of providers reported serving at least one child who paid for care with a child care subsidy or through the vouchers. The presence of state-funded programs is especially important in communities where there are higher rates of child poverty and children in low-income families. Subsidized care helps providers stay afloat, helping to create a viable child care market in their communities, providing both private pay families and families who are income eligible an option for safe care. These programs help create access to child care programs and, in turn, providing a source of stable, reliable care for families. It also offers a safe place in the community and brings needed jobs to the neighborhood economy. For families participating in the AP and CalWORKS programs, the vouchers they receive for child care allow them to allow them to work and purchase care that they might not otherwise have been able to afford, given the high cost of care. Though because reimbursement rates provided by the state are not based off of current market rates, they are often inadequate, leaving providers struggling to cover the cost of care in their programs. Finally, given the prevalence of state-funded childcare in the overall market, it's not difficult to see how middle-income families also benefit from these investments. Many centers and home providers are able to operate due to the mix of private pay and state-funded care. Reductions on the state-funded portion of care have a direct impact on all families and children served by the program. So in closing, I would just like to reiterate that to keep our child care supply whole, to meet the demands of working parents, an investment in public-funded care is critical. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, last, Department of Education, Monique Ramos once again.
Monique Ramos with the Department of Education. So the sergeant should be handing out, or did hand out, basically an overview of how the funding for new slots went out this year, and I just want to spend a few moments going over that. So in regards to the 7,500 full-day, full-year slots for the California preschool program, I want to take a step back because there's been a little bit of information to make sure we're clear. The department received 32,000 letters of intent, meaning that 32,000 agencies intended to apply for these slots, but they did not actually apply for those slots. We had 10,000 essentially. I'm sorry, we had a request. Back up, sorry. So the initial request that we had based on letters of intent was for 32,000 slots. The department does not believe that that is the only need in the state. We believe that the need is well beyond 32,000 slots in the state preschool program. Once we actually received the request for proposals, or the applications that came in for the field, we received 203 requests. That totaled 10,000 slots. Of those slots, we received about 6,100 full-day requests and 4,100 part-day requests. We were able to fund all of those requests. Those children began receiving services before on October 1st of 2014. It is important to note that we went into the part-day slots because we did not receive enough requests for full-day slots. So that's why part of that money was utilized for part-day, essentially because the field did not have capacity to take on 7,500 full-day slots. Moving on to the restoration dollars for the 1,000 slots for the general child care program. Priority was given to infant and toddlers. We had 87 funding requests that equated to about 2,700 slots. We were able to fund 1,300 slots, which left about 1,400 slots that we were not able to fund. 8 of those 53 agencies were awarded. I happen to operate Family Child Care Home Education Network, and these families were able to be served starting in December 1 of last year. Then talking about the increase in the state preschool slots, the additional 4,000 new slots, we received 138 applications that equal about almost 10,000 slots. That equals about 6,300 full-day slots and 3,600 part-day slots. Those applications were scored and posted as of April 7th of this year, and we will be notifying awardees by the end of the week. Those children and families will begin receiving services as of July 1, 2015. And I have Debbie McManus if there's any questions again.
Okay. Assemblymember Grove?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. When you go to the restoration of the slots, what can you explain to me what a slot is? Is it for a year? When you fund it, is it funded for a year? Is it funded for a month? Is it funded for, what's the funding mechanism and the time for the slot?
Good morning, Debbie McManus, Department of Education. The slots is kind of a general term for the number of children that could be served. With the amount of dollars that were given, which is why some of the numbers you can see, if we were given 7,500 slots and we funded 10,000 slots, because of the difference in the numbers depending on the length of year the children are receiving services, the length of day, because of the reimbursement piece. So the number of slots is kind of that chair that's in that classroom space, but it's a little bit different for every program, so the numbers are not quite equal.
Is it funded for, so like if somebody applies for 7,500 slots or multiple people apply, that slot is funded for what period of time?
For 1 year.
For 1 year.
Yes.
What's for that 7,500 slots that were funded, or in this case 10,000, whichever one you would, I'd like you to use the one that was actually funded, the 10,000. What was the cost of funding those 10,000 slots?
That I don't have with me, but we can get that for you.
Does anybody have that?
And does Marguerite, do you know? I have it. Oh, thank you.
So it's a little bit different, but essentially it was about $70 million effectively between Proposition 98 and non-Proposition 98 funding.
So $70 million for 10,000 slots?
Yes. So the reason, though, is that $70 million was for 7,500 full-day slots. The department funded, based on the demand, 6,000 full-time slots and 4,000 part-time slots. The part-time slots are a little bit more than half the cost of a full-day slot, so that's why they were able to fund so many more slots with the same amount of funding.
I understand that we had money set aside for full-day slots and part-day slots, and we got more part-day slots and full-day slots, and we used our money wisely to cover that. Exactly. I get that. Yeah. So the total money was $70 million to fund approximately 10,000 slots. That's roughly 4,000 were part-time and 6,000 were full-time.
Exactly right.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Thurmond?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you all for the presentation. First of all, Ms. Lynn Hall, I want to thank you for everything that you shared about your own experience and the experience of many other parents, and for your advocacy. You reminded me a bunch of things that a long time ago, my kids, when I was looking for child care, that kept me up at night, and fears about what kind of care my daughters might receive. It kept me up at night. Now they're older and they're in school. Now they keep me up at night for other reasons, but I think what keeps me up at night now more so is this issue of how we're going to pay for all the things that we should be paying for. And I appreciate your comments, Ms. Gable, and love working with First Five. It's a great resource for us. I'd like to ask you in a minute to share any thoughts you have about how we go from funding barely 10,000 slots to, the important charge that you gave us at the beginning of your remarks of funding really every 4-year-old's preschool opportunity. What's worked in other states to do this. I'm concerned about the volatility of California's budget, and I know that you've worked in government a long time, and you know this stuff better than me, that we're so dependent on our budget in a way that there are these ups, these flows upward and downwards, and it has, from my perspective, prevented our ability to do the right thing in early childhood education, in social services, in health. And, if you've got examples of what's worked in other states, I'd love to hear what we should be thinking about. Because when I heard 10,000 slots, I thought that's one city. I know he had to leave. That's Assemblymember Chu's city alone, right? That's San Francisco slots for one city, if that's the best we can do. So since it's a tough question, I'm going to let you think about it, ruminate on it. I'm going to come back to Ms. Ramos and ask if you would clarify for me when you talked about we couldn't fill 7,400 slots. What's behind that? I'm like, what's the challenge there? Why can't I would think that the demand would be so great that we'd be able to fill those full-time slots and then some. Like, I understand some families may want part-time slots. I get that. But most people I know, they need a full-time slot, right? They just can't manage. I remember the first time that my daughter went to kindergarten and it was half day. And I'm like, well, what am I supposed to do for the rest of the day? Anyway, what's the challenge behind filling those slots?
So I'm actually going to ask Debbie McManus to expand on
Okay.
Good morning. Quite honestly, it's rates. The rates for full-day slots are not where they need to be for programs to be able to afford to provide full day. And in fact, when you look at the rate structure, putting 2 part days into 1 full day gives you a higher reimbursement than 1 full day. So a lot of agencies just cannot afford to provide full-day slots. We know that's what families need, and that's what the community needs, and that's what we want, but the funding is just not there, especially for high-quality programs, especially for programs run by LEAs and those types of programs. It's just not fiscally viable for them right now.
So if 10,000 slots, roughly part-time and full, equates to $70 million, so that means, and I know this is the new math, and I'm not good with that, but 32,000 slots was the original request. So we're talking about roughly upwards of $210 million if we had intended, or if we were in a position to fulfill that request of 32,000. And is that the 32,000 slot request that you received in the letters of intent? Do you think that reflects the need in California, or is the need actually greater than that?
I believe the need is greater. Those were the number of agencies who were looking at the program saying, yes, we want to look into applying for this funding. I believe if you were to ask the parents and the families what their needs were, I believe that number would be a lot higher.
Give me a number, because I know Ms. Gable's working on a formula to help us get there. And what do you think the projection would be? And is there a capacity issue? Is that why it's 32,000? Is that just because that's the number of agencies that are able to manage it? But what would the real number be? And if there's a gap, best guess, we're not going to give you the red pen here. Best guess. And what would it take to move our agencies to capacity to be able to manage the actual need?
So I know there's agencies out there who might have stronger numbers than we do.
I'm sure they're willing to share
and they will correct me, I'm sure. But if you were to look at the number of children, of 3 and 4-year-olds who are eligible, or even if you looked at that cohort of 0 to 4-year-olds coming up, the number of children in poverty, looking at the total number of children and then looking at, what percentage of those are in poverty, those would be your eligible children. So I don't know, several hundred thousand.
If there's a trend, because I know not every eligible child, not every family necessarily wants to partake, but if there's a trend, if we can predict based on trends that this is the desire, this is the utilization that we should expect for the size of our population and trends for interest in child care, I'd be interested in that. And I don't expect you to have it right then and there, but at some point I'd like to hear it. And then obviously it's the legislature's job and the governor's job to figure out how we pay for what we pay for. But one of the things I've appreciated about all the visits that I've received from Parent Voices, I got to give a shout out to Bananas because they won't let me come home if I don't, is that there's always been a willingness to have the conversation with us about how we manage the budget. And you talked about all those cuts, Ms. Gable. What strategies do you think we should be looking at to fund the full costs for preschool?
So I won't say that I have some sort of magical formula first and foremost, but I do want to express how difficult it is going to be, and knowing that it's very difficult. Every state that's been looking at ambitious goals around childcare, and by that I mean trying to cover as many children as possible in a number of different prioritized constructs, whether it be around preschool or looking for more of a priority around infants and toddlers, around our babies. It really takes dedicated multiple-year strategies, focus, priority around revenue. We saw disproportionate cuts to childcare during the hardest years, and we're not seeing an equally disproportionate reinvestment in what are, for better or for worse, better years for us. And so that's a really hard question we have to think about as we think about what happens after the expiration of Prop 30's revenues, as we think about where we're going with our revenue systems as a state overall. Where do babies and preschoolers and the high-quality environments they need while 90% of their brain development is in progress, while their parents are working? What are we going to do, and how are we going to afford it? I think it's been very clear to all of us during these hardest years that our current revenue sources and the volatility that they contain haven't been to the benefit of our youngest children and to the best investment we could be making per the research national, state. I know you guys have seen it ad nauseum. So the question is, how do we think about our revenue systems and think about our youngest children who happen to poll very well with the voters? Think about how we're going to build them into the system for the long haul and not use them as a potential throwaway in future hard years. Because at this point, we're not even back to where we were, as I said, when we were all still quite frustrated at the lack of access in 2008. And so we know just from historical trends that the next recession is unfortunately going to come someday. And how are we going to weather that as well?
Thank you. I guess my last question, Mr. Chairman, would be to CDE. Do we have a work group that is looking at, as Ms. Gable says, this long-term strategy of how we get there, what the phasing would need to look like, and do we have a kind of a work group that pulls in providers and First Five and parent groups that's really having that conversation? It always feels to me like all we do is try to survive where we are right now, and when we're trying to survive, we're always looking back like 4 or 5 years, right? We're trying to say, how do we get back to the rates of where we were 10 years ago instead of where we should be 20 years out in the future? Do we have a working group of that type that's taking on this question long term for our kids' education?
So we do. We have the superintendent has a stakeholder group with early education, and so we meet with those folks, chat with them, listen to them, talk about these issues. We talk about rates and slots and quality all the time. There also was a preschool report to the legislature that went out last spring that has outlined some different areas to take a look at. We also always want to go back to the CELP, the California Early Learning plan that was put out in 2013, and so just constantly trying to move forward with where we need to be, obviously working closely with our state agencies so that we are having these conversations. But again, it does come back to right now we are still trying to repair from the recession, and we're still trying to plug up some of those holes as we're trying to look forward to reinvestment.